A pregnant German Shepherd canine stood trembling in the middle of a silent winter road, snow clinging to her fur, her heavy belly dragging low with the lives she was trying to protect. No one was meant to see her. Not out here, where the cold swallows sound and hope disappears without a trace. But on that same road, a Navy SEAL drove through the storm. A man shaped by war, carrying a heart frozen long before winter arrived. When the canine didn't run, when she stood her ground to protect the unborn lives inside her, something in him cracked open. What happens next will remind you that even in the coldest seasons, miracles still find the broken. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if stories of courage, faith, and second chances matter to you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Winter pressed heavily over the Blue Ridge Mountains, burying the narrow pass in wet snow and low-hanging fog that swallowed sound, distance, and direction alike. The world felt reduced to a tunnel of gray and white, endless and indifferent. Jack Miller guided his truck slowly along the winding mountain road, both hands steady on the wheel, despite the slick asphalt beneath the tires. He was in his late 30s, tall and solidly built, with the kind of lean strength shaped by years of disciplined training rather than comfort. His dark hair was cropped short, threaded with faint strands of premature gray near the temples, and a rough shadow of stubble framed the hard lines of his jaw. His face carried a permanent restraint, as though emotion itself had learned to keep a respectful distance. Jack was a Navy SEAL on temporary leave, though the uniform was far from him now. What followed him instead were memories he could not outrun: sand, smoke, shouting voices that returned in fragments whenever the world grew quiet enough. He had chosen this route deliberately. Remote, empty. No towns for miles, no conversations required. The mountains offered something the world no longer did: silence without expectation. Jack wasn't searching for peace. He doubted such a thing existed anymore, but distance helped dull the edges. His thoughts drifted despite his effort to keep them buried. Faces of men whose names he no longer spoke. A split second too late. Orders followed, then silence. The counselor had suggested he reconnect with something familiar. Jack had laughed at that. Familiar was the problem. Familiar was where things had gone wrong. The truck rounded a blind curve, headlights cutting weakly through the fog, and Jack's breath caught. A dark shape stood in the middle of the road, motionless against the swirling snow. He slammed the brakes. Tires skidded. The truck fishtailed before stopping inches short. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the shape moved, swaying unsteadily, and Jack saw her clearly. A German Shepherd, female. K9 by posture alone. Her coat was a dull mix of black and gray, matted with ice, ribs faintly visible beneath the fur. Her belly was swollen, heavy with pregnancy, hanging low as though gravity itself were conspiring against her. She trembled violently, legs stiff, yet she did not retreat. Jack opened the door, cold air biting into his face like broken glass. The dog's ears twitched, but she didn't run. Her amber eyes met his, clouded with exhaustion rather than fear. She tried to take a step forward and failed, collapsing onto the snow with a muted whine that barely carried through the wind. Jack crouched instinctively, boots sinking into slush, every muscle tense. Up close, he saw the marks that told a story no one wanted to hear. A deep groove around her neck where a metal collar had once been fastened too tightly. Faded scars along her hind legs. This wasn't a stray. This was a working dog, discarded. She shifted again, struggling to roll onto her side, then onto her belly, curling awkwardly around the swollen curve of her abdomen as if shielding it. That single movement struck Jack harder than any scream ever had. He had seen men shield others like that. He had done it himself. The instinct was unmistakable. Protect the vulnerable. Even if it costs you everything, Jack swallowed hard. His first thought was practical, detached. He couldn't take responsibility for this. He wasn't equipped. He wasn't stable. He had barely kept himself together these past months. But another voice rose beneath the reasoning, quieter and far more dangerous. This was why he had joined in the first place. Not the missions, not the medals. Moments where leaving meant becoming something he could never live with. The dog lifted her head weakly, breath fogging in shallow bursts. Snow clung to her muzzle. She didn't beg. She didn't bark. She simply held his gaze, unblinking, as if making a silent decision of her own. Jack felt something crack inside his chest. Small, but final. He shrugged out of his coat, draping it over her trembling body, careful around her belly. She flinched, then relaxed slightly as warmth seeped through. A low sound escaped her throat, not pain, not fear, relief. Jack exhaled slowly, realizing his hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from the weight of the choice he had already made. The road behind him vanished into fog. Ahead lay more uncertainty than he could measure. But for the first time in a long while, the path felt unavoidable. He glanced once more at the empty mountain pass, then down at the fragile life pressed against the snow. "All right," he murmured, voice barely audible over the wind. "I see you," Winter answered with silence, but the dog did not look away. Cold wind swept across the mountain pass, driving fine snow sideways and pressing silence into every hollow. The fog thickened, wrapping the road and the forest alike in a dull, breathless stillness. Jack remained crouched in the snow, his knees already numbing through his jeans, his breath coming slower now as adrenaline drained away. The German shepherd lay half-curled before him, sides heaving, each breath shallow and uneven. Up close, the damage was clearer. Her coat, once dense and proud, was brittle with ice and neglect. The skin beneath showed faint sores where harness straps had rubbed raw. She smelled of cold metal, old fear, and exhaustion. Jack had smelled that combination before, on dogs pulled from collapsed buildings overseas, on animals that had worked until their bodies failed them. His jaw tightened. This wasn't abandonment born of accident. This was disposal. She tried again to rise, muscles trembling violently. Her back legs buckled, sending her chest back into the snow. Instinct took over before thought. Jack slid forward, one gloved hand bracing her shoulder, the other hovering uncertainly near her swollen belly. It was heavy, unmistakably late term. He counted silently, the way he did under pressure. Breathing rate. Responsiveness. She wasn't dying yet, but she was close, and pregnancy made everything more dangerous. One wrong movement, 1 hour more in the cold, and the cost would be multiplied. Jack straightened slowly, scanning the road and the tree line. No houses, no lights, no tire tracks but his own. He was alone with a decision he had sworn never to make again. The dog lifted her head, ears flicking weakly, amber eyes locking onto his face. They weren't pleading. They were assessing, measuring. Jack recognized that look instantly. Trust withheld but not withdrawn. She had learned, somehow, that not all humans were the same, but that none were to be believed without proof. A low sound vibrated in her chest, not a growl, not a whine. Pain held in check by discipline. Canine discipline. Jack exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. That sound had followed him through ruined streets and shattered compounds, dogs trained to stay quiet, even when hurt, even when afraid. "You're not wild," he muttered, voice rough. "They trained you too well. He reached for his coat again, wrapping it tighter around her torso, adjusting it carefully to avoid her abdomen. She flinched once, then stilled. Her breathing eased by a fraction. Jack noticed the way her front paw twitched toward him, then stopped short, as if habit restrained her from touching. That restraint struck him harder than fear ever could. He glanced back at his truck. Warm. Running. Safe. He could lift her, place her inside, drive away. He could also call animal control once he reached cell service and let someone else carry the responsibility. The thought surfaced easily, seductively. He had done his part. He had stopped. He had covered her. No one would blame him for passing the burden on. That voice was familiar. It had justified worse decisions in darker places. Another memory surfaced uninvited. A hallway filled with smoke. A teammate pinned beneath debris, alive but fading. Orders crackling through the radio. Hold position. Wait. Jack's hands curled into fists at his sides. He had waited then. He had obeyed. And someone had died with his name on their lips. The dog shifted again, trying to curl more tightly around her belly. A thin line of moisture darkened the snow beneath her. Jack froze. Not blood. Amniotic fluid. Or stress leakage. His pulse spiked. She was close. Too close for hesitation. He knelt again, this time without doubt, sliding his arms beneath her chest and hindquarters. She tensed instantly, muscles locking, teeth flashing for a split second before control snapped back into place. Her restraint told him everything. She didn't want to bite. She wanted to survive. It's all right, Jack said quietly, not expecting understanding but offering it anyway. I've got you. She allowed the lift, body heavy and awkward in his arms. He felt every tremor, every strained breath. She was larger than she looked, solid beneath the damage, built for endurance. Her head rested briefly against his shoulder, then lifted again, alert despite exhaustion. Jack staggered slightly under the weight, boots slipping before finding traction. He adjusted his grip, careful, deliberate, the way he had once carried wounded men out of kill zones. The truck door opened with a metallic creak that sounded far too loud in the fog. Warm air spilled out, carrying the faint scent of oil and old fabric. Jack eased her onto the passenger seat, clearing space, layering his coat and a spare blanket beneath her. She resisted for a moment, paws braced, eyes scanning the interior as if searching for threats. Then her legs gave out. She collapsed onto her side with a soft huff, belly rising and falling heavily. Jack shut the door gently, heart hammering now for reasons that had nothing to do with cold. He leaned against the truck, head bowed, breath fogging the air. The choice was made. There was no undoing it now. He didn't know where he was taking her. He didn't know if she would survive the night. He only knew one thing with sudden, brutal clarity. Walking away would have been easier, and that was exactly why he hadn't done it. Jack slid into the driver's seat and turned the wheel, headlights cutting forward into the fog once more. As the truck rolled slowly down the mountain pass, he glanced toward the passenger seat. The dog's eyes were closed now, her body still trembling but no longer rigid. Trust, he knew, wasn't given all at once. Sometimes it was loaned, moment by fragile moment. He drove on, carrying more than a wounded K9. He was carrying the consequences of choosing to care again. Morning crept reluctantly over Hollow Creek beneath a sky the color of dull steel, the snow thinning into a cold mist that clung to rooftops and bare trees as though the town itself were holding its breath. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of the main road, a narrow wooden building with faded white paint and a hand-lettered sign that had not been replaced in decades. Jack parked carefully and stepped out, the cold biting through his jacket as he opened the passenger door. The German Shepherd stirred weakly, amber eyes opening just long enough to assess her surroundings before closing again. He lifted her slowly, mindful of her swollen belly and trembling legs. She was heavy now, not just in weight, but in responsibility. With each step toward the clinic door, Jack felt eyes on him. Curtains shifted. A truck idled across the street longer than necessary. No one approached. No one asked questions. Hollow Creek watched without witnessing. Inside, warmth and the sharp scent of antiseptic replaced the cold. A bell chimed softly overhead. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 60s, tall and slender, with iron-gray hair pulled into a loose bun that refused to stay neat. Her skin was pale and lined, not from age alone, but from years spent under harsh lights and long nights. This was Dr. Helen Carter. Her posture was straight, deliberate, the posture of someone who had learned to remain calm no matter what walked through the door. Her eyes, a clear winter blue behind wire-framed glasses, sharpened instantly when she saw the dog in Jack's arms. "Bring her back," Helen said, already moving, her voice low and steady. No surprise. No hesitation. The examination room was small, but spotless. Jack lowered the dog onto the padded table, and Helen's hands moved with practiced confidence, gentle but efficient. She spoke softly as she worked, not to Jack, but to the dog, her tone calm enough to cut through fear. The German Shepherd flinched once, then settled, breathing uneven but controlled. Helen's fingers traced the scars along her neck and legs, pausing briefly at each mark. Her mouth tightened. She did not comment at first. She listened to the heartbeat, checked the gums, examined the belly with careful pressure. "Late stage," she said finally. "Very late." She straightened, meeting Jack's gaze. "And this isn't her first pregnancy." Jack felt the words land with quiet violence. He nodded once, jaw locked. Helen removed her gloves slowly, as though buying time. "Whoever had her," she continued, "used her hard. Too hard. Repeated breeding. Minimal recovery." She glanced toward the door before lowering her voice. "I've seen this before." Jack caught the unspoken weight beneath her words, not just here, not just once. As Helen prepared fluids and medication, a younger woman passed the doorway, slowing when she saw the dog. She was in her 20s, short and slight, with dark hair braided over one shoulder and a freckled face that could not quite hide its concern. This was Lily Moore, the clinic assistant. She avoided Jack's eyes but lingered anyway, hands clasped tightly in front of her. When Helen asked for supplies, Lily moved quickly, but Jack noticed how her shoulders tensed. Fear lived here. Quiet, habitual, well-practiced. "People around here know," Lily said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Helen shot her a warning glance, but Lily didn't stop. "They just don't talk." She left the room before either of them could respond. Helen sighed, rubbing her temples briefly. "This town," she said, not angrily, but with exhaustion. "It's easier to stay silent than to become a target." She looked back at the dog. "But silence doesn't protect anyone. It just gives monsters room to work." Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed, feeling the weight of understanding settle heavily in his chest. He had been in places like this before. Different country, same rules, people disappearing, files going missing, questions answered with shrugs and lowered eyes. Hollow Creek wasn't ignorant. It was conditioned. The dog on the table was proof of what silence allowed. Helen finished her work and covered the dog with a blanket. "She'll live," she said finally. "If she stays warm. If she's protected." Her gaze sharpened again. "That depends on you." It wasn't a question. Jack looked down at the German Shepherd, her breathing steadier now, her body curled instinctively around the life inside her. He understood then that she was more than a victim. She was evidence, a survivor that someone, somewhere, would want erased. The town's quiet suddenly felt less like peace and more like a warning. Outside, the mist thickened again, swallowing the street as Jack lifted the dog carefully into his arms. Hollow Creek remained still. Too still. And for the first time since stopping on the mountain pass, Jack realized the danger hadn't ended when he left the road. It had only changed shape. Night fell early over the forest. Heavy snow drifting down in thick, soundless sheets that muted every edge of the world. The trees stood rigid and dark, their branches bowed beneath winter's weight. The cabin appeared out of the storm like a half-forgotten thought, its wooden walls weathered gray, and its roof sagging slightly under years of snow and wind. Jack guided the truck in slowly, cutting the engine before the tires fully stopped. Silence rushed in immediately, deep and unnatural. He lifted the German Shepherd carefully, her body warmer now but still trembling beneath the blanket. Inside, the cabin smelled of old pine, iron, and cold ash. Jack stoked the small stove, coaxing life from embers that had not been used in weeks. The fire caught slowly, casting uneven light across the single room. The dog lowered herself onto the rug near the heat, curling instinctively around her belly. Jack watched her for a long moment, the rise and fall of her breathing anchoring him to the present. He told himself this was temporary, just one night, just warmth, just enough to get through until morning. But the forest did not feel empty. Jack shed his jacket and hung it by the door. Every movement measured, controlled. Old habits surfaced without permission. He checked the windows. 1, 2, 3, all intact, frost-laced and dark. The quiet pressed in on him, thick with something he could not name. The dog's ears twitched, her head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. She did not growl. She listened. Jack felt a prickle along his spine. He had learned to trust that sensation long ago. The absence of sound was not peace. It was concealment. He stepped outside, boots crunching softly into fresh snow. The cold bit immediately, sharp and clean. His breath fogged the air as he circled the cabin slowly, eyes scanning the tree line. That was when he saw them. Footprints. Human. Not his. They curved wide around the cabin. Careful. Deliberate. Someone had taken time here. Nearby, half buried under snow, were tire tracks leading off toward the eastern ridge, newer than the storm should have allowed. Jack crouched, brushing snow aside with a gloved hand. The edges were sharp, fresh. His jaw tightened. He followed the prints toward the forest edge and stopped short. There, tipped onto its side, was a metal transport crate, large, industrial. Its door hung open, hinges stiff with rust. The inside smelled faintly of old fur and antiseptic. Jack didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He knew what it was. He had seen cages like this stacked in warehouses overseas, holding lives reduced to inventory. The implication settled heavily in his chest. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had been here before him, someone who knew exactly what the dog was worth. Inside the cabin, the German Shepherd had shifted closer to the stove. Her eyes followed him as he re-entered, alert now despite exhaustion. She tried to rise and failed, letting out a low, frustrated huff before settling again. Jack knelt beside her, checking her paws, her belly, her breathing. Stress had tightened her muscles, but she was holding. Barely. He rested a hand lightly on her shoulder, feeling the tension beneath the fur. "Easy," he murmured. She did not pull away. Trust, thin and fragile, stretched between them. Jack sat back on his heels, mind racing. He replayed the signs in order, building the pattern whether he wanted to or not. The scars, the breeding, the crate, the tracks. This wasn't a single act of cruelty. It was a system. Organized. Quiet. profitable, and the dog lying beside him was a loose end. A mistake someone would correct if given the chance. The cabin, once a retreat, now felt like a trap. He scanned the door, the windows, measuring distance, angles, exit routes. The soldier in him woke fully, alert and unforgiving. He moved methodically after that. The truck was repositioned, nose facing out. Supplies were stacked near the door. The fire was dampened to lower the light. Jack kept the cabin dim, shadows thick along the walls. The dog watched him the entire time, her gaze tracking each movement. She understood preparation, understood tension. When he finally sat beside her again, she shifted closer, pressing her flank lightly against his leg. It was not affection. It was alignment. Two beings aware that something unseen was closing in. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing tracks even as new ones were made. Jack stared at the darkened window, listening past the wind, past the trees, searching for rhythm that didn't belong. He had brought danger here. That truth settled with cold clarity. Saving her had not ended the threat, it had redirected it. The cabin was no longer shelter. It was a line in the snow. The storm arrived without warning, swallowing the forest in wind and snow that erased distance and sound alike. Darkness pressed close, heavy and suffocating, as though the mountain itself had decided to hide what was about to happen. Jack woke to the dog's movement before any sound reached him. She shifted abruptly, claws scraping softly against the floor, her body tense in a way that cut through sleep like a blade. The fire had burned low, leaving the cabin dim and unevenly lit. Jack sat up instantly, heart steady, mind already narrowing its focus. He didn't need to hear footsteps to know they were no longer alone. The air inside the cabin felt charged, tight with intent. He moved silently, slipping on boots, grabbing his jacket, his eyes never leaving the door. The dog struggled to stand, pain flickering through her rigid posture, but she did not whine. Discipline held. Jack knelt beside her, resting his forehead briefly against hers, feeling the heat of her breath. Whatever was coming, panic would only kill them faster. A shape passed the window, then another. Jack counted shadows, timing their movement, mapping angles in his head. At least 3, maybe more. They moved carefully, experienced, aware of noise. This was not a random search. These men knew what they were looking for. Jack's chest tightened as he registered the precision in their approach. He had seen this pattern before, halfway across the world, under different skies. Predators who believed themselves unseen. He reached for the emergency pack he had prepared earlier, slinging it over his shoulder, then slid an arm beneath the dog's chest. She stiffened, then allowed the lift, pain contained behind clenched muscles. Trust again, fragile and earned under pressure. They slipped out the back door just as a dull thud hit the front of the cabin. Wood creaked. Snow swallowed their exit instantly, the storm erasing them as if they had never been there. Jack moved quickly but carefully, choosing terrain that would hide their tracks. He dragged a branch behind him, sweeping false lines across the snow, circling wide before doubling back toward denser trees. The dog's weight strained his arms, but adrenaline burned hot, cutting through fatigue. Her breathing grew faster, sharper, but she did not fight him. She conserved strength, the way working dogs were taught to do. Every few steps, Jack paused, listening past the wind, separating chaos from intention. Behind them, voices rose briefly, muffled and frustrated. A flashlight beam sliced through the storm, scanning too high, missing them entirely. Jack altered direction again, moving downhill now, where snow collected deeper and sound died faster. He lowered the dog behind a fallen log, shielding her body with his own, as the light passed within yards of their position. His pulse slowed deliberately. Panic was loud. Control was invisible. He waited until the beam vanished, then moved again, this time angling toward a narrow ravine where wind funneled snow into blinding sheets. Tracks would vanish there within minutes. As he moved, his mind worked in parallel, assembling the fragments he had gathered since the mountain pass. The scars. The crate. The clinic's guarded silence, the organized movement outside his cabin. This wasn't desperation. It was logistics. Transport routes. Holding locations. Breeding stock moved quietly through forgotten towns where no one asked questions. The dog in his arms wasn't just valuable. She was inventory that had gone missing. A loss someone would correct aggressively. The understanding settled cold and precise in his gut. This was bigger than cruelty. This was commerce. The ravine opened into a stand of tightly packed pines. Jack slid between them, pressing deeper until the wind howled loud enough to mask even careless movement. He set the dog down gently, crouching beside her, checking her belly, her legs, her breathing. Stress had tightened her body dangerously. He murmured low reassurances, meaningless words carried on tone alone. Her eyes remained locked on his face, alert despite pain. A tremor ran through her flank, then eased. She was holding. Barely. Voices echoed again, closer this time, spreading out. Jack adjusted his position, placing himself between the sound and the dog, body angled to deflect attention. He reached into his pack and scattered scraps of fabric soaked earlier in oil and metal scent, tossing them wide to confuse trained tracking instincts. Old tricks, effective ones. He moved again, dragging his own footprints backward before stepping sideways onto rock, then into snowdrift untouched. The storm did the rest. Minutes stretched thin as wire. Then the voices drifted apart, frustration thick in their tone. Jack didn't relax. Not yet. He waited until the forest swallowed them completely before lifting the dog again. His arms burned now, muscles shaking with effort. She pressed her head briefly against his chest, a silent acknowledgement. Not gratitude. Partnership. Far behind them, the cabin lights flickered once, then died. Jack stared into the storm, understanding the message clearly. This was no longer a warning. It was a hunt, and he had chosen to run it on his terms. Dawn never truly arrived in the high forest. The storm thinned into a pale gray haze, snow drifting lightly across the ridge as if exhausted by its own fury. Jack moved on instinct now, not strength. His legs burned with cold. His arms shook beneath the weight of the German shepherd pressed against his chest, but he did not stop. Each breath scraped his lungs raw, every step a negotiation between will and failure. The slope ahead narrowed, dropping sharply on one side, forcing him toward exposed ground. He felt the dog tense, her body tightening with pain, a low sound escaping her throat before discipline reasserted itself. Jack lowered her briefly behind a cluster of rocks, crouching beside her, his forehead touching hers. Her eyes searched his face, not afraid, only strained. He understood that look. It was the same one men gave when they knew they were close to the edge, but refused to fall. Almost, he whispered, though he didn't know if it was truth or prayer. Shouts echoed behind them. Closer now. Flashlights cut through the thinning snow, beams sharper, more confident. The men chasing them were no longer cautious. Frustration had given way to urgency. Jack rose slowly, positioning himself between the lights and the dog, heart hammering with the calm focus of a final stand. He scanned the ridge, measuring distance, calculating angles, preparing for contact. His body remembered what his mind tried to forget. This was where he functioned best. And that realization terrified him more than the men closing in. A sudden sound cut through the chaos. Not a shout, not a command. A siren, distant but unmistakable, rising and falling through the trees. Jack froze, listening past the wind. Another followed, then another. Red and blue lights flickered faintly against the snow-clouded sky, growing brighter by the second. Confusion rippled through the voices behind him. Orders overlapped. Someone swore loudly. The beams of the flashlights wavered, no longer coordinated. Jack exhaled slowly, tension breaking into something dangerously close to relief. Figures emerged from the tree line below, moving with purpose and authority. The lead officer was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his face square and weathered, a thick mustache frosting with snow. His uniform bore the calm weight of long service. This was Deputy Mark Caldwell, a man known in the county for patience rather than force, a quality earned after losing a partner years earlier during a quiet call that turned violent. He raised one gloved hand, voice steady as it carried uphill. "Sheriff's Department." "Stay where you are." The effect was immediate. The men who had hunted Jack scattered, instinctively retreating toward the trees. They didn't get far. State troopers moved in from the east, while forest rangers closed the western drop. One of the rangers, a tall woman with sharp features and close-cropped blonde hair, moved with practiced precision. Her name was Elaine Porter, a former wildfire responder whose calm under pressure had become legend after she led evacuations during a fatal blaze years earlier. She spoke little, acted decisively, and tonight she did not hesitate. Commands snapped through radios. Hands went up. Bodies were forced to the ground. The hunt ended in seconds. Jack lowered himself carefully as the dog's weight finally overwhelmed him. His knees hit the snow hard, pain flaring and fading beneath exhaustion. The German shepherd sagged against him, her breathing ragged now, her body trembling in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Elaine reached them first, crouching immediately, her expression shifting as she assessed the dog's condition. "She's close," she said quietly. "Real close." Caldwell nodded sharply, already signaling for medical transport. "Get a vehicle up here now." As they moved, Jack felt hands steady him, lifting some of the weight from his arms. He resisted at first, reflexive, then allowed it. The dog was transferred carefully onto a stretcher, lined with blankets. She whimpered once, searching blindly until Jack's hand found her shoulder again. Only then did she still. The sirens faded into the background as the world narrowed to breath and touch. Jack followed downhill in a daze, every step watched, supported, his body finally allowed to fail. Days later, warmth replaced snow. The veterinary clinic glowed softly under yellow light. The storm outside reduced to a memory. Jack sat rigidly in a chair, hands clasped, staring at the closed door of the examination room. Time stretched unnaturally. Helen Carter moved past him once, offering a brief nod, her face composed but intent. When she returned, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "She made it," Helen said. "They all did." Jack didn't respond immediately. The words took time to sink in, to find purchase somewhere deeper than exhaustion. He stood slowly, legs unsteady, and followed Helen inside. The German shepherd lay resting now, her body slack with relief and pain, eyes half closed. Pressed against her were several small, squirming shapes, dark and warm and alive. Puppies, healthy, whole. Jack felt his chest tighten painfully as he watched her nose each one gently, counting, confirming. Survival. For the first time since the mountain pass, Jack allowed himself to sit. The fight was over. The running had ended. Light had reached the forest at last. Spring arrived quietly in the Blue Ridge, the snow retreating into dark soil and swollen streams, leaving the forest damp, green, and newly awake. Jack stood on the porch of the cabin, breathing in air that no longer burned his lungs. The mountains looked different now, stripped of their white severity, softened by budding leaves and thin sunlight. He had stayed through the thaw, through the long nights when sleep came in fragments, through mornings filled with unfamiliar sounds, tiny paws, soft whimpers, life beginning again. The German shepherd lay just inside the doorway, her body stretched out in a posture that spoke of safety rather than exhaustion. Her coat had regained its sheen, black and gray catching the light, her ribs no longer visible beneath the fur. She watched her puppies with steady focus, amber eyes alert but calm. Jack had never named her. Somehow it felt unnecessary. She had reclaimed herself without permission. The puppies tumbled against one another near the hearth, clumsy and bold, their movements full of curiosity rather than fear. Each was different, one darker, one lighter, one already stubbornly independent, but all carried the unmistakable solidity of health. Jack found himself sitting on the floor more often than not, observing them in silence. He had spent years learning how to leave places quickly, efficiently, without attachment. Now he stayed still, letting moments pass without measuring their cost. It felt unfamiliar. It felt earned. The paperwork was brief, almost anticlimactic. Sarah Klein arrived from the county office one clear afternoon, her car kicking up gravel as she parked beside the cabin. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with chestnut hair pulled into a practical ponytail and skin browned by years of outdoor work. Her eyes were sharp, but kind. The eyes of someone who had learned to balance empathy with procedure. She watched Jack interact with the dog before saying a word, noting the way the German shepherd leaned subtly toward him, how the puppies clustered without hesitation. "They've already decided," Sarah said quietly, a small smile touching her mouth. She signed the forms with efficiency, but her voice softened as she handed them over. "This isn't adoption," she added. "It's recognition." Jack nodded, unsure how to respond. Recognition was a word he had avoided for most of his adult life. Being seen meant being known, and being known meant vulnerability. Yet as Sarah left, the weight he expected never came. Only a steady sense of rightness settled in its place. Hollow Creek shifted slowly around him. People began to speak, cautiously at first. A nod at the store. A brief conversation near the clinic. Helen Carter waved one morning as Jack walked past with the dog at his side, the puppies bundled in a crate behind him. No one asked for details. They didn't need them. Silence, he learned, could change shape. It could loosen its grip. He spent afternoons helping where he could, clearing fallen branches, repairing fences, offering quiet advice when asked. Word spread that he knew dogs, that he listened more than he spoke, that he stayed. The cabin changed with him. It became warmer, not just with fire, but with routine. Jack built a low enclosure beside the porch, reinforced the fence line, marked the boundaries the way he had once marked perimeters overseas. Except now, the purpose was different. Protection without violence, structure without threat. The German shepherd followed him everywhere, her gait confident, her presence grounding. At night, she slept near the door, not out of fear but habit, a sentinel who no longer expected intrusion. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the mountains in amber and shadow, Jack stood outside watching the puppies chase one another across the clearing. Their mother rested nearby, head lifted, content. He felt the familiar pull of memory tug at him, the old reflex to prepare for loss, to brace for impact. But it faded. The future did not feel like an enemy here. It felt uncertain, yes, but uncertainty no longer meant danger. It meant possibility. Jack rested a hand against the cabin wall. solid and warm beneath his palm. This place had once been a refuge from the world. Now it was part of it, a home not defined by escape, but by choice. He looked down as the German Shepherd rose and joined him, her shoulder pressing lightly against his leg. Together, they watched the last light fade, neither guarding against what might come, both fully present in what had already arrived. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, on trembling legs, in broken moments, placed directly in our path by God when we need them most. This story reminds us that even in our darkest seasons, God is still working, still guiding, still restoring what we thought was lost. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and consider subscribing for more stories like this. May God bless you, protect your family, and place a quiet miracle in your life right when you need it most.